Hey everybody, back with another Exotic Car Hacks review, and today we are going to be looking at my brand new Aventador SV. Well, it's new to me because it just likes to take trips from across the other side of the US to the other side of the US for no reason. As I said in my unveil video, this car was a Florida car that ended up in Chicago and then was brought back to Florida. Today we are looking at this incredible SV and not only talking about why I bought it, but talking a little bit about some of the key features that basically make the SV a really cool car or not such a cool car. And again, I'm sorry if I keep shitting on your dreams by just talking about the truth of what works and doesn't work on these cars. So if you get seriously offended by the fact that I have zero value for the cars themselves, but rather only look at what works or doesn't work as an owner, not as a mental masturbator or car reviewer, someone that actually puts their own money behind their cars and doesn't borrow cars from a dealership, then I'm sorry for you. But what we're going to talk about today is looking at this car specifically because last time you saw it in the unveil video, it was a little bit different. If you recall, this car had silver polished wheels, it was lowered, and it had a giant SV logo, which is now completely missing from the car. In addition to that, I actually noted that I would never put black wheels on it. And yet, here it is with factory black wheels, raised with no SV logo and a tiny SV logo. So what happened and why does it look like this? Well, first off, a couple of key features. I bought this car specifically because of its modifications, which I thought at the time, just looking at them on the website, seemed to be spectacular to look at altogether. However, after looking at it closely, I noticed a few issues with the modifications. The first one being the rear wheel that was nice and done by Vossen was actually done quite shitty. What do I mean by that? Well, you see, one of the issues with the Vossen wheel that was in the car was that it was running a 335 tire because the rear wheel was actually a 12.5 width. Now, if you know anything about Aventadors, the factory rear wheels are 13-inch wide. So why would an aftermarket manufacturer go to 12.5 on the rear of an Aventador when it comes from the factory with a 13? If we look at my SVJ, we would notice the exact same thing, that it has a 13 and it now has a better 13 with a more aggressive offset. So that was the biggest mistake that Vossen made, was basically building the wrong size wheel for the rear of this. They would argue that, you know, it just doesn't want to rub and so, but I would argue that that's bullshit because there's plenty of 355 rear tires on 22-inch wheels that have worked just fine, including on my old Aventador S with my Anarchy wheels, which never rubbed and yet looked absolutely fucking spectacular. So this was a huge fail. And when I quickly realized why the car looked like it had skinny legs when looked up close, I realized that the rear tire size was wrong and therefore the wheels weren't the type of wheels that I would want to have on my particular car. So I got rid of those wheels and therefore here I am with the factory black wheels, which I may say actually look very, very good and sport a 355 rear tire, which is the way it should fucking look from the factory. Secondly, there was this giant SV logo here, which was a sticker. And this beautiful SV logo, which is painted on the car, a very expensive $10,000 option, was actually hidden by this extra piece of vinyl here to obviously add this one and cover this one. And while I understood the purpose of covering this one for this one, I just couldn't understand why someone would cover up a $10,000 painted logo and put a $12 sticker here on the back in exchange for that. This is a work of art. This was atrocious, so that also came off the car. In addition to that, there's pinstriping on the car that is done very tastefully, so it's going to now stay on the car, and it just works. But this particular car, as I mentioned in the unveiling, was a very high sticker of almost 580,000 and still sports almost a year and a half left on the factory warranty, which makes this probably the only SV in the country that still had factory warranty on it, which made it a no-brainer to buy it. Now, if you've been following anything I teach at Exotic Car Hacks, you would know that the market since the purchase of this car less than about 2 weeks ago has gone up $50,000 on the Aventador SV, meaning that this car is now worth 50 grand more. And if you don't understand what's happening in the market, please refer back to my video on why our car price is rising, and don't say COVID because that's just ignorant. So outside of that, let's now talk about the SV itself. I mean, we're going to do a separate video comparing it to the SVJ, but let me tell you about the car itself from a design standpoint. It is an Aventador, that's for sure, and it has a big ass wing, but it has a lot of distinctive differences between the first gen Aventador and this car. Now, many people compare this to the S model. They go the Aventador S and the SV, but this should really be compared to the first Aventador, not the S, because the S is a byproduct of what led to the SVJ. This is not, but this is a really interesting vehicle for a couple of reasons. First off, outside of the high options, this is also equipped with a really nice $10,000 plus Lamborghini factory race exhaust, which really makes the car sound beautiful, especially from the factory. But there are a few issues with the design of this car that just significantly bother me. The paint, spectacular. The color is called Blue Cedrus or some shit, super awesome, amazing. There are issues with the SV, and there's a couple of things that just don't really work for me personally. One, I've never been a fan of this front bumper. I think it's absolutely horrible. Two, I can't understand why the mirrors can't be carbon, especially not those front rockers. I've never seen one with carbon. I don't understand why they won't allow this when the rest of the car is carbon. Three, they do something with these cars that they kind of stopped doing with the SVJ, thank fucking God, is while the car is really beautiful inside, but if you look right here on the top of the speedometer here, you'll notice they have this fake carbon fiber shit, which is called carbon fiber skin. It's very common amongst Evos and a lot of these cars where you can do it as an option. It's absolutely fucking atrocious. I don't know why people do this. It looks like fake carbon, it doesn't flow, and it's just fucking stupid. They do this on the roof too, which kind of kills the car as a whole. But outside of that, it's basically an Aventador. It's just a much faster Aventador that handles really good at high speeds. But it doesn't really change the fact that it's a sluggish piece of shit at low speeds. You still feel the bumpiness, you still feel the inability to just really drive around the city and have fun. You really have to go fast to get the gist of what an Aventador does. And this was one of my issues with the original Aventador, is that it's a stunt car, not really a performance car. But in this particular case, this now is a better, more performance-driven stunt car, but it still remains a stunt car. Something that I said completely different about the SVJ is that the SVJ itself has such a better, much better, more driver feel to it than this car. And from the factory, you can also see the setting of the suspension. Look at how much lower the rear comes from the factory that the front comes. It looks like a bus. However, on the SVJ, you have a much more subtle, aligned factory line to the car, which is better. There are good things about the SV from a design feature. First off, I think that the rear design of this car is absolutely striking. And in addition to just having carbon everywhere, the fact that it has the glass bonnet, which is a must-have option if you buy an SV or any type of Aventador, also showcases the incredible carbon engine bay, which is also an option, but truly worth it. Don't get cheap if you do that. I guarantee you, these are some of the things that make a big difference on the car. But you will notice some very crappy mesh grills here, something they've gotten rid of with the SVJ that just completely destroys the design feature of the back end, but it's just necessary. I guess one of the issues with this car is that we're now reviewing it at a time when the SVJ is already out, so it's already outdated per se. And while it's still cool to the eyes of some because they call this their dream car, from a true owner standpoint of spending $600, $500, $450,000 on a car, you're going to start to realize that these little things will take a toll on you if you've owned better Lamborghinis. But if this is the best Lamborghini you've owned, then you haven't seen what better looks like, so it won't really bother you that much. From a performance stand, we're going to take a quick drive and really talk about the differences between, you know, how the car shifts, etc. But I will tell you right off the top that from a design standpoint, the only real flaw of this, now from an outdated standpoint, is this front bumper more than anything else, and those vents on the back. Everything else is just still very much a beautiful looking car for its age, regardless that it's now 5 years old or not. It's still, you know, works. This is a 2017. But again, the interior here, you'll see full interior with every option possible, a lot of piping, carbon fiber rear seats. You know, everything is just really well done with the yellow calipers and the paint. It just flows spectacularly well. And I think it just works really well here for an Aventador. But again, it really comes down to the driving, which is the biggest opportunity here, I think, for Lamborghini, because the Aventador has always been sluggish, and this one is no different. Even though it drives a little bit better with the exhaust, it still holds back a lot of what makes it a true driver's car. But let's go for a quick drive and see what we think. All All right, guys, so let's go for a quick drive and see how good the SV really is. Hope you guys are ready for that. I'm gonna leave this on open right here so we can hear the car. You guys ready for this? All right, ready? All right, let's go. Watch. Let's see how good that exhaust sounds, right? Like one of my favorites. I'm gonna put it in Corsa mode so the valves are open, and listen to this. Alright, we gotta make sure we don't catch on fire, right? Because that's how these cars catch on fire. You just sit there and fucking romp on it. So if you ever have a clown being like, please rev it for me so I can hear it. Let's go for a quick drive. You'll notice all the buttons, everything basically mimics just all the other Aventadors. Nothing really unique here with the SV. The dash, the one difference between this and the SVJ, I really would hear as you change through the modes, Corsa, Sport, Strada, you're not really getting anything different other than that tiny little thing saying Sport and changing. Nothing really happens. So we're gonna leave it on Sport and go for a quick drive. And so I can make a point about why this either works or doesn't work so you guys feel it. And you can hear the little cracks and rattles, which is something that's just severely annoying. And you can, again, at low RPMs, you once again start feeling that it shifts much better than a regular Aventador, right? Much better. Smooth, no issue. The issue is when you go to Strada, it basically drives like complete shit. You feel the bump like with every single hold, and see when we downshift, everything kind of doesn't work. Once we go into Sport, everything starts to get better. And then of course into Corsa, it drives even better. The one thing I've noticed with all of these SVJs, SVs and everything else is they drive significantly better with the Sport and race modes than they do in Strada mode. They're just not meant to drive on the street. Like I don't care what it is, it's just not meant to do that. So for some odd reason, like it's just really clumsy, really fucking annoying all around, except for when you're going really fast or you're in Sport mode and you start adding revs, then the shifts get smoother, everything kind of works out better. But outside of that, it's really not, you know, that different than a regular Aventador. It just has a lot more power. Around turns, you feel it a little bit more because of the dynamic steering, but nothing you didn't feel in the Performante. It's just not as agile and versatile. So as soon as this light turns, I'm going to give you a taste of how it really acts, you know, like especially with a little bit more power to it. But I think off spending a little bit of time with it, I would say that the only thing I've really noticed as a significant improvement over the regular Aventador, not the S, is that it is more fun in higher speeds, but still completely boring and bizarre to use in lower end speeds. And it also sits very bizarre from a standpoint of like how the suspension sits, as I showed you earlier, where the front sits really high and you have a lot of clearance, which is good on one side, but it's really just bad from a design aesthetic standpoint. It's just very ugly, which is weird. And it doesn't do what most Aventadors do, which is constantly put itself back in neutral instantly, which holds revs like much better, and it holds the actual gear much better. And here we go. Again, we're in Sport mode now. You feel that? You see what happens? Like, just to give you an idea, that's kind of a little bit of the problems this car creates. Like, it has that hesitation of wanting to take off unless you're going fast. And we're going to do something different now. I'm going to show you what happens when you're basically like on it, wanting to go. So you can't really have spirited fun with it. You have to either go for it or not go for it. There isn't really an in-between cause. You see? Much smoother, no issues. Once you're going really fast, no problem at all. Once you go really slow and you're trying to kind of play, it's just hard to play with an Aventador. Like, you either have to fucking go for it or you don't go for it. But with the SV, it's even more apparent than the regular S model or the regular Aventador model, which was a little bit more docile kind of on street play. But the SV, really, you either got to go for it or you can't. You can't really kind of hold that middle ground gear of fun revs and noise and stuff in the city, which means it's basically very unattractive outside of doing some highway runs or some runs with guys, you know, driving fast on the highway. It's just not really useful as a car. Turning radius is the same, no different than any of the other cars. Not as good as the S, but again, you see what happens, like when you go kind of at a 5,000 shift into the next gear, you get a lot of hesitation. The car just doesn't know what you're trying to do. But if you really want to like go for it, like if you actually downgrade it and you go, okay, I'm like really gonna go for it, it pulls you really, really hard, and it does something really exciting, and then it works. It's very planted, it's very exciting on takeoff, and just has a very, very minor amount of slippage from the tires. And again, it could be that these tires haven't been used for a long time. So other than that, you know, a pretty cool car, just not very usable on a day-to-day basis. I've always said the Aventador is just not a car you can daily. There's no glove box, there's barely any room up front, except if your girlfriend's like 5 feet tall and basically 100 pounds, you can hide her in there from your wife. Other than that, impossible to do anything with this car. And trust me, you will attract a lot of pussy with this. This is basically the biggest pussy magnet out of any car, anywhere. And yes, I mean, even more than a P1, because the half retards that walk the earth don't know what a P1 is, or they don't know what a 918 is, or none of these cars. But the Aventador, just, you saw it from the other video where we basically invited chicks over to see. They even knew what the name of this car was. They don't know the difference worth shit between an SV, SVJ, or Aventador, but they know an Aventador, and they know when the doors go up, like they say, the panties come down. So there you have it. This is basically my view on the SV. Not as really docile as an S or usable as an S, not as exciting as an SVJ. So I think it was a great car for the moment, not so great anymore. But other than that, I think today we have one fucking idiot in front of us. But I think today we run basically in a place where cars like these are, you know, fantastic as long as you haven't experienced the better end of what we call the spectrum of Aventadors out there. So if I was you and I was looking to buy an Aventador, I would consider the SV from a value standpoint. I wouldn't really consider the SV from a performance standpoint when the SVJ is around. And I would actually, more honestly, take an S Roadster over an SV from a Aventador experience standpoint, because the majority of people that drive anything lower than an SVJ aren't really taking them to the track. I won't even take my SVJ to track one time, so that'll tell you how much the average Lamborghini owner doesn't give a flying fuck about, you know, tracks or anything else. So if you want more honest reviews, I know even if they're not flattering to the cars, make sure you like, subscribe, and of course, leave us a comment and tell me, did I miss something about the SV outside of the common shit you hear everybody talk about when they say the SV is here? Outside of giving you that, is there anything negative that I missed about this car that I should have been bringing up? Otherwise, I hope you like it. And like I said, this is more a review on a secondary basis. From a value standpoint, any SV you basically buy now in the mid fours is going to be worth in the high fours down the road anyways. So it's a good investment, not so good of a usable driver's car. There you have it. I'll catch you next time on my next Exotic Car Hacks review.